ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जायमुदीरये। नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवतीरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकीम्। ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामीनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. By His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. We are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 26, Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. So, yesterday we have done with text 23 and 24. Srila Prabhupada writes a very deep purport there, and we have discussed the purport in a big way. Text 25. Sahasrashirasam sakshat yam anantam prachakshate Sankarshanakhyam Purusham Bhutendriyamanomayam. Translation.
The threefold Ahankara, the source of the gross elements, the senses, and the mind, is identical with them because it is their cause. It is known by the name of Sankarshana, who is directly Lord Ananta with 1,000 heads. Hare Krishna.
So, this is the threefold Ahankar. Srila Prabhupada will be explaining in the next purport. Is the source of gross elements, the senses, and the mind. These are the three. Is known as Sankarshana and is Ananta Sahasrashirasham Sakshad Anantam. Text 26. Kartutvam karanatvam cha karyatvam cheti lakshanam Shantagora Itiva swasyadya ahankrite. Translation.
Translation. This false ego is characterized as the doer, as an instrument, and as an effect. It is further characterized as serene, active or dull, according to how it is influenced by the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Purport. Ahankara or false ego is transformed into the demigods, the controlling directors of material affairs. As an instrument, the false ego is represented as different senses and sense organs, and as a result of the combination of the demigods and the senses, material objects are produced. In the material world, we are producing so many things, and this is called advancement of civilization. But factually, the advancement of civilization is a manifestation of the false ego. By false ego, all material things are produced as objects of enjoyment. One has to cease increasing artificial necessities in the form of material objects. One great Acharya, Narottama Das Thakura, has lamented that when one deviates from pure consciousness of Vasudeva or Krishna consciousness, he becomes entangled in material activities. The exact words he uses are Satsanga. How do you pronounce that? Prabhuji, Satsanga?
Satsanga chhadi kainu asate vilas. Te karane lagiya yei karma bandha fas.
Thank you. I have given up the pure status of consciousness because I wanted to enjoy in the temporary material manifestation. Therefore, I have been entangled in the network of actions and reactions. Hare Krishna.
This false ego is characterized as doer. So now we are coming to the point of the same. Now look at this, how Bhagavad Gita is beautifully connected here. Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashah ahankara vimudatma karta aham iti manyate. So ahankara. So this is the ahankara. Correct. So this false ego is characterized as doer, as an instrument, and as an effect. Three things: kartutvam, karanatvam, and karyatvam. Three things. It is further described as shantam ghoram vimudham, like terrific activity in the mode of passion, right? Or there is a dull activity in the mode of ignorance, or there is a serene activity in the mode of goodness. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, ahankar or false ego is transformed into demigods, the controlling directors of the material affairs. And as an instrument, the false ego is represented as the different senses and the sense organs. As a result of combination of the demigods and the senses, material objects are produced. So when there is ahankar, then there is production of material objects, right? And Prabhupada says this one can actually factually see in the modern day civilization, because modern day civilization, they talk about the advancement of civilization in terms of number of products they have, right? Which civilization is called as advanced civilization? It is the which is having the highest GDP is most advanced civilization, right? So how clearly it is, right? This is called as advancement of civilization, but factually the advancement of civilization is manifestation of false ego or producing different objects for material enjoyment. So sometimes people have this question: if your saints were so advanced in the previous times, why did they not produce so many things? The reason is because the people did not produce so many things because they defined advancement of civilization differently. Currently, the advancement of civilization is defined as having the material objects, right? But previously, the advancement of civilization was defined, especially in the previous yuga, based on one's spiritual elevation. And that's why Prabhupada says here, but what is the advancement of civilization? And Prabhupada quotes Narottam Das Thakur here, that when one deviates from pure consciousness of Vasudev, he becomes entangled in material activities. Satsanga chadi kainu asate vilas, te karane lagiya karma bandhafas. So, by giving up the spiritual activity, the soul proper, he engages into the material identification, material ahankar, and thus collecting the material objects. And in the process of trying to enjoy the material objects, what happens is he gets bound in the network of actions and reactions, karma bandhafas. So this is how beautifully explained is what is the previous GDP and what is the current GDP. Previous age, it was about advancement of civilization, about advancement of the soul proper. Modern times, advancement of civilization is advancement of body. Text 27. Vaikarikat vikurvannan manas tatvam ajayata tat sankalpah vikalpabhyam vartate kama sambhavah. Translation.
From the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. Purport. The symptoms of the mind are determination and rejection, which are due to different kinds of desires. We desire that which is favorable to our sense gratification, and we reject that which is not favorable to sense gratification. The material mind is not fixed, but the very same mind can be fixed when engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, as long as the mind is on the material platform, it is hovering, and all this rejection and acceptance is asat temporary. It is stated that he whose mind is not fixed in Krishna consciousness must hover between acceptance and rejection. However, advanced man is in academic qualifications. As long as he is not fixed in Krishna consciousness, he will simply accept and reject and will never be able to fix his mind on a particular subject matter.
From the false ego of goodness, Now, what we are going to see is the different types of false egos and what they are going to rise. From the false ego of goodness, there is evolution of mind. So originally, mind originates from goodness, false ego of goodness, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes that the symptoms of mind are sankalpa and vikalpa, that to do something and to reject something. And how the mind will decide? Mind will decide based on what is for sense gratification. Okay, something is favorable for sense gratification, it is sankalpa. Which is unfavorable, which is which will be rejected, sankalpa and vikalpa. But this unsteady mind, this is the nature of the mind. Bhagavad Gita also talks about this, right? Chanchalam himana Krishna pramati balavadranam tasyaham vigraham manye. Chanchalam himana Krishna. Mind is very, very unsteady, chanchala. But when the mind is focused on the Supreme Lord, Savai Mana Krishna Padaravindayor, then what happens? Mind becomes focused and steady. And with steady mind will look for something Sat or eternal. Otherwise, it is always in search of temporary Asat. Prabhupada says, and this will not change simply by your PhD or the academic qualification. Academic qualification will not help here. Why? Because if one is not fixed in Krishna consciousness, he will always in the process of accepting and rejecting. And therefore, one has to fix one's mind on Krishna, and then the mind will become steady. Text 28. Yadvidurhi aniruddhakyam rishikenam adhishwaram Sharaden Devarashyamam Samradhyam Yogini Shanaihi. Translation.
The mind of the living entity is known by the name of Lord Aniruddha, the supreme ruler of the senses. He possesses a bluish-black form resembling a lotus flower growing in the autumn. He is found slowly by the yogis. Purport: the system of yoga entails controlling the mind, and the lord of the mind is Aniruddha. It is stated that Aniruddha is four-handed with Sudarshan Chakra, conch shell, club, and lotus flower. There are 24 forms of Vishnu, each differently named. Among these 24 forms, Sankarshana, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, and Vasudeva are depicted very nicely in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where it is stated that Aniruddha is worshipped by the yogis. Meditation upon voidness is a modern invention of the fertile brain for some speculators. Actually, the process of yoga, meditation, as prescribed in this verse, should be fixed upon the form of Aniruddha. By meditating on Aniruddha, one can become free from the agitation of acceptance and rejection. When one's mind is fixed upon Aniruddha, one gradually becomes God-realized. He approaches the pure status of Krishna consciousness, which is the ultimate goal of yoga. Hare Krishna.
The mind should be focused on, mind of the yogi specifically, should be focused on Lord Aniruddha, who is the supreme ruler of the senses, Rishikenam Ishwaram, and who is a bluish-black complexion. And the yogis realize this personality very slowly, Shanaihi. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, the system of yoga means first controlling the mind and focusing the mind on the Supreme Lord. And in this specific case, the yoga's case, the mind should be focused on the form of the Lord, which is Aniruddha. Now, the form of the Lord, which is holding Chakra, Shankha, Gada, and Padma in this sequence. Okay. And when you change the sequence, because there are 4 places, when you change the sequence, it becomes 4 factorial, right? 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. And thus you will get 24 forms of the Supreme Lord based on the position of Shankha, Chakra, Gada, and Padma. So if you see in the Balaji temple, especially in our Pune Balaji temple, we have the deities of, this around the Parikrama Marga of Balaji, there is Aniruddha, Satya, Vasudev, and one can look at the positions of the Shankha, Chakra, Gada, Padma, right? So these are accordingly. So this is Chakra, Shankha, Gada, Padma. So this is Aniruddha. And so there are, although Prabhupada says, although there are 24 forms, 4 are very specific, which are called as Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. A short form is Vespa, very simple. And they are very nicely explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So the yogis, they have to meditate on the personality of Godhead. Sometimes people say, just meditate on the void or some jyoti, some flame, or something you are meditating on shunya or meditating on anything. Prabhupada says meditation on voidness is the modern invention by some fertile brain. But Yoga Shastra, including the great sage Patanjali, never talked about meditating on voidness. He talked about meditating on Paramatma, and there is a elaborate description of Paramatma even in the Yoga Shastras. Right. So mind has to be fixed on Aniruddha, and then the yogi will become God realized, and thus he will attain the ultimate goal of yoga. Text 29. Tejasatto vikurvanat buddhi tattvam abhut sati dravyas vijnanam indriyanam anugraha. Translation.
By transformation of the false ego in passion, intelligence takes birth. O virtuous lady, the functions of intelligence are to help in ascertaining the nature of objects when they come into view and to help the senses. Purport: intelligence is the discriminating power to understand an object, and it helps the senses make choices. Therefore, intelligence is supposed to be the master of the senses. The perfection of intelligence is attained when one becomes fixed in the activities of Krishna consciousness. By the proper use of intelligence, one's consciousness is expanded, and the ultimate expansion of consciousness is Krishna consciousness.
So while the false ego in goodness gives rise to mind, and from there comes desires, now false ego in passion gives rise to intelligence. O Sati, he's calling his mother, O virtuous lady, O Sati. The function of the intelligence is to keep ascertaining the nature of the objects when they come into view and thus help the senses. Prabhupada writes in the purport, the intelligence is the discriminating power, Viveka Shakti, and which will help senses make the choices. And therefore, intelligence is supposed to be master of the senses. Bhagavad Gita also says this, that that verse about Indriyani, the Indriyas are superior. Superior is intelligence. So intelligence is supposed to be the master of the senses. And when we'll actually start using intelligence, progressively he will come towards Krishna consciousness. Right. And Prabhupada says the ultimate expansion of intelligence is consciousness in Krishna consciousness. And this we have seen. Even the great scientists, they begin their search, and slowly they come to becoming theistic. Right? Lord Kelvin, very famous statement. If you are scientific enough, you will be forced by science to believe in existence of God. And there are so many scientists like that. Simply by the studying science, they themselves realize that there has to be a higher power, higher energy, higher personality. And then when you start on the theistic path, naturally, you will Bahunam Janmanamante, you will conclude towards Krishna consciousness. And therefore, expansion of intelligence is acceptance of Krishna consciousness. Text 30. Samshayota viparyaso nischaya smritirev cha swapa ityuchyate buddher lakshanam vrityatah prathak. Translation.
Doubt, misapprehension, correct apprehension, memory, and sleep, as determined by their different functions, are said to be the distinct characteristics of intelligence. Purport. Doubt is one of the important functions of intelligence. Blind acceptance of something does not give evidence of intelligence. Therefore, the word samshaya is very important. In order to cultivate intelligence, one should be doubtful in the beginning. But doubting is not very favorable when information is received from the proper source. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that doubting the words of authority is the cause of destruction. As described in the Patanjali Yoga system, pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smrityah. By intelligence only, one can understand things as they are. By intelligence only, one can understand whether or not he is the body. The study to determine whether one's identity is spiritual or material begins in doubt. When one is able to analyze his actual position, the false identification with the body is detected. This is viparyas. When false identification is detected, then real identification can be understood. Real understanding is described here as nishchayaha or proved experimental knowledge. This experimental knowledge can be achieved when one has understand the false knowledge. By experimental or proved knowledge, one can understand that he is not the body but spirit soul. Smriti means memory and swapa means sleep. Sleep is also necessary to keep the intelligence in working order. If there is no sleep, the brain cannot work nicely. In Bhagavad Gita, it is especially mentioned that persons who regulate eating, sleeping, and other necessities of the body in the proper proportion becomes very successful in the yoga process. These are some of the aspects of analytical study of intelligence as described in both the Patanjali Yoga system and Sankhya philosophy system of Kapil Dev in Srimad Bhagavatam.
Samjayota viparyaso, nischaya smritirevacha swapa. So these are the 5 distinct characteristics of intelligence. Which are the 5? Samshaya, viparyasa, nischaya, smritir, and swapa. Doubt, misapprehension, correct apprehension, memory, and sleep, as determined by their different functions, are said to be the distinct characteristics of intelligence. Right. In the Purport Srila Prabhupada explains there is a certain importance of samshaya also. So samshaya is very important. Why? Because samshaya, what is a samshaya? Samshaya means asking right questions when things are not clear. That is called as samshaya. And this samshaya is useful till the time we identify a right source of information. But fortunately, when one comes to parampara and one comes to, then one should give up that samshaya. Samshayatma vinashyati. Then one should not be always doubtful about it. No, then one should give up samshaya. So samshaya is to find a right source of intelligence, right source of information. Correct. Next is pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smritya. So Prabhupada quotes here Patanjali Yoga system. One can understand things as they are, whether or not one is body. And this is Prabhupada says. Next is viparyasa. So viparyas is even, in Marathi also we say there is vastu sthiti and there is viparyas. Viparyas kela. Viparyas kela means what it means is something is something and then you explain it in completely misunderstood way. That is called as viparyas ho jana. So viparyas here is misappropriation, and the biggest misunderstanding is when one is not body, one thinks oneself to be body. When one is not matter, paropi manute anartham. Although one is spiritual in nature, still one thinks oneself to be material and thus conducts one's activities in the material realm. This is the ultimate viparyasa. When the false identification is detected, then the real identification is understood, and then one becomes nischaya. That is real understanding. One comes to the correct understanding. So first there is samshaya, then there is viparyas, then there is nischaya, correct understanding, and then there is smriti. Prabhupada says smriti and swapa both are very important. Smriti is memory and swapa is sleep. Now look at these points. Sleep is also necessary to keep the intelligence in working order. Right. If there is no sleep, the brain cannot work nicely. And therefore, even in Bhagavad Gita, where Lord has such a less time to explain everything, but still the Lord described the importance of regulation. Yukta ahara viharasya, yukta chestasya karmasu, yukta swapnavabodhasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. That one has to be very regulated in one's eating, sleeping, and other necessities so that one can perform the yoga properly, so that one's intelligence will also function rightly. Sometimes we can see when we have a less sleep, that all our And modern science has gone really deep into this, the importance of sleep. One has to sleep in time, and not just one has to sleep sufficiently, one has to sleep quality also. So one has to sleep between something like 10:30 to 4:30. So these are like peak 6 hours of the sleep. And then based on one's bodily needs and everything, one has to extend it by 1 hour or so or something like that. But sleep is very important, and which will keep the function of intelligence proper. So these are the 5 characteristics of intelligence. Samshaya, Viparyasa, Nischaya, Smritir, Swapa. These are the 5. तैजसानेन्द्रियाण्येव क्रियाज्ञानविभागशः प्राणस्य हि क्रियाशक्तिर्बुद्धेर्विज्ञानशक्तितः. Translation.
Egoism in the mode of passion produces two kinds of senses, the senses for acquiring knowledge and the senses of action. The senses of action depend on the vital energy, and the senses for acquiring knowledge depend on intelligence. Purport. It has been explained in the previous verses that mind is the product of ego in goodness, and the function of the mind is acceptance and rejections according to desire. But here, intelligence is said to be the product of ego in passion, that is, the distinction between mind and intelligence. Mind is a product of egoism in goodness, and intelligence is a product of egoism in passion. The desire to accept something and reject something is a very important factor of the mind. Since mind is a product of mode of goodness, it is fixed upon the Lord of the mind, Aniruddha, then the mind can be changed to Krishna consciousness. It is stated by Narottam Das Thakur that we always have desires. Desires cannot be stopped. But if we transfer our desires to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is the perfection of life. As soon as the desire is transferred to lording it over material nature, it becomes contaminated by matter. Desire has to be purified. In the beginning, the purification process has to be carried out by the order of the spiritual master. Since the spiritual master knows how the disciple's desire can be transformed into Krishna consciousness, as far as intelligence is concerned, it is clearly stated here that it is a product of egoism in passion. By practice, one comes to the point of the mode of goodness, and by surrendering or fixing the mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one becomes a very great personality or Mahatma. In Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly said, Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. Such a great soul is very rare.
Yeah,
In
so
this,
it's a big purport. We will see in section. Now, the next is egoism in the mode of passion produces 2 kinds of senses. And which are these senses? These are Jnanendriya and Karmendriya. So, the knowledge acquiring senses, the Jnanendriyas, and senses for action, they are Karmendriya. Right. The senses of action depend on the vital energy. Senses of action depend on the vital energy. Typically, what you call the muscle mass and the real energy within the body. Senses for acquiring knowledge depend on intelligence. So one will depend on energy, another will depend on intelligence. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that we have already seen mind is the product of ego in goodness and function is sankalpa vikalpa, whereas intelligence is product of ego in passion and the function is the 5 functions: samshaya, viparyasa, nischaya, smritir, swapa. Right, these are the 5 functions. And thus, one has to engage both accordingly, right? So one has to engage one's mind by engaging in the Supreme Lord, Savai Mana Krishna Padaravindayor, and similarly, one has to engage one's intelligence. So, point here is that one cannot become desireless. This is constitutionally not possible. One can try. Prabhupada says in one purport, even to becoming desireless is also a desire. So one cannot become desireless. The desire will always be there. The beauty is that one has to transfer one's desires towards Krishna consciousness. And this is the activity. The spiritual master is expert in transferring the desires. Right. And the transfer of the desire takes place by association. Sangat sanjayate kamah. Whatever kind of sangha we have, sangat sanjayate, that type of desires will develop. This is very, very important. Whatever sangha we have, that kind of desires will develop. Right. And Prabhupada further says, by practice, one comes to the point of mode of goodness, and by surrendering or fixing one's point, one becomes a great personality, Mahatma. And such a personality is very rare. So we will conclude here and continue tomorrow. Previous chapter was actually chapter 25, which is, which was like amazing chapter, and therefore we were going very slow. And till now also the description was very evolved and very, very technical. That's why we were slightly slow. But our general pace is every day we should be covering 5 to 6 pages. Okay. So I'm happy that we are back to our original speed of 5 to 6 pages. We will conclude here and continue tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Hare Krishna.
Prabhupada.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Thank you,
Prabhupada. Thank you,
Prabhupada. Thank you,
Prabhuji. Thank you,
Prabhuji. Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.